All right, could I get everyone's attention, please? Wow, this microphone has a lot of projection. That's great. So, my name is Haley. I am a senior Econ math major. I am the president of the Economics Association. Just for starters, how many of you who are students have heard of the Economics Association? Okay, so pretty much everyone. That's good. We still get people coming to us sometimes saying, "What's the Economics Association?" So I always wonder how big our reach is. So the Economics Association does a wide variety of programming for students. We do a lot of faculty luncheons and coffee chats so you can get to know your faculty better. We've done career and internship panels with students talking about where they're working over the summer and then where they're working after graduation. We also do programming workshop series, company tours, socials, things like that. So how many of you have been to an Econ Association event in the past? Okay, so a lot of you. So a lot of you are familiar. That's good. Yeah. Well, we always hope to see you at our events. We try to plan events that we think will be fun for students and informative. And on that note, I'd like to introduce a couple people who will be on your Economics Association e-board next semester. We have Uma Bhatti right over here. Uma, if you want to wave to everyone so that they know who you are. Yeah, she's a sophomore. She's going to be our Director of Operations next semester. And then Carol, if you could raise your, yeah. She's going to be our Director of Communications next semester, so be on the lookout for them. So on behalf of the Economics Association, I'd like to thank Alice Holtzman, Karina Chicas, all of the alumni who are here today to put on this event. We think it'll be a great event for students. We're happy to have you all here. And I remember the first time I ever found out that women in economics was an actual thing. I was a freshman here, and I got an invitation to a luncheon similar to this one, along with a message that only about, at that time, 25% of the econ department students were female. And I looked at that and I said, huh, so that means you're almost twice as likely to find a woman in Viterbi than you are in the econ department. You know, that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. And so since then, I've heard that our proportion of the department that's female has been increasing. I think we're closer to about 33, 35% now. Is that correct? Okay. So it has been growing. And I am really happy to see all of these these alumni out here showing what you can do with an econ degree. Because one, I think it's important to have role models out there for people who are showing what you can achieve, and then also what's possible with economics. If you talk to people about what does an econ major do, or you ask them, what do you think an econ major does? In my experience, I've gotten a lot of different answers. A lot of them that happen to fall into certain categories, but you get a wide variety of answers. And I think as these alumni will show today, there's so much you can do with econ, and there's so many ways that econ can help you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Deborah Senior, who will be moderating the panel this evening. And if you'd like to call the alumni up now, that'd be fantastic.
Thank you, Haley. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for coming. Thank you to all of the students who, I understand some of you are already economics majors, in which case, wonderful. For those of you who might still be thinking about it, then we're very excited to have you here. And obviously, we are here because we believe in the power of an education in economics. And what better way to illustrate that than to hear firsthand from a number of people who have built their careers on a foundation in economics. We are very lucky we have quite a variety of professions that are represented here today. We also have a variety of industries that are represented, and we also have people who are at various stages of their career. So we encourage you as students, please, we invite you and welcome you to engage with all of the alums. What we'll do tonight first is we'll have a panel conversation, and then after the panel we can do some Q&A, and then you are welcome to join a table with an alum that represents a profession or a field that you are interested in. You can talk to various people. So we encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity to meet some people, also meet some other students. You heard a lot from Haley about the community that we have here. It's not just alums, it's not just students, it's everybody. So tonight we are here for you. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. First, we have B. Rarewala. She is an associate principal in learning environments for Harley, Ellis, Devereaux. She'll tell you more about what that means. Thank you. Also would like to welcome, where is Tiffany? Tiffany Ikeda. She is an attorney, and she is an associate at Latham, Watkins. Welcome, Tiffany. Let's see, where else do we have? Elizabeth O'Neill. Elizabeth is the Director of Supply Chain at Ontic Engineering and Manufacturing. And last but not least, we have Elena Hartley. She is an investor at Greycroft Partners. Right, so please help me welcome our panelists. So what we'd like to do is to hear from each of you a little bit about your story. So maybe to start off with, if you could tell us a little bit about what your position is, what that role entails, maybe a little bit about day-to-day life in that position. Bea, would you like to start?
Sure, thanks for having me. So I am an associate principal with HED, Harley, Ellis, Devereaux, and we're a national architecture and engineering firm. You may know some of our work. We did the USC Village, and we did Wallace Annenberg Hall. We're about to embark on a new building for the Turby School. Maybe one day we can get a building for the economics department. Better than Caprillion. I won't go there. But my role in the company is a national market and development strategist for learning environments. So I focus in K-12 and higher ed developments. And that ranges from working with developers on P3s, which is public-private partnerships, kind of doing the forecasting to see what trends are happening in both K-12 and higher ed, identifying those opportunities, and then setting up our teams to mobilize and do the work.
Excellent, thank you. Tiffany.
Hi everyone, my name's Tiffany Ikeda, and I'm an associate at Latham and Watkins. It's a major law firm that has offices all over the globe, including about 3,000 lawyers. So a very, very big firm. I'm a litigator, and when you think about what is it that a lawyer does, lawyers do lots of things, not just what you see on Law and Order. And so I do civil litigation. That means whenever there's a lawsuit, I get involved, and this is a civil court, right? So this is not a criminal matter. I don't do those. In particular, I usually represent large businesses in complex commercial litigation. So that might be litigation over a breach of contract. That might be litigation over class action litigation, for example. So if your data has ever been compromised, for example, we might represent the company in defending against those class action lawsuits. And so part of that is talking about why it is that a class should not be the method in which the class action's resolved. But all of that is basically a different way of applying economics into everyday lawsuits as we're thinking about damages. So my everyday life is very, very varied, depending upon what the case may be. And that's one of the things that I love about being a lawyer is depending on what you are working on, you might be learning about a very different thing, you know, about the development of solar panels, about a patent, about helicopter crashes, about a movie production. And so it's a very varied thing, and it's one of the things that I'm grateful for.
Excellent, thank you. Elizabeth.
Hi everyone, my name's Elizabeth O'Neill. So I'm the director of supply chain. Right now I'm acting, but we're just going to ignore that and just say I already have the job. So what that means is I buy things with other people's money. Really, I don't buy anything anymore. I don't do any real work. I just make sure the pieces go around and strategize the department. And what that means, so I work in aerospace and defense, which is manufacturing. So what we do in my department is we purchase parts that go on airplanes. So one of the product lines that I have now is, so who's ever flown on an airplane before? Okay. Do you know when you're like on the airplane and they go, there's no smoking allowed on this Delta flight, right? And then you go, well, how are they going to know, right? And there's like a little no smoking sign in the lavatory. We make the smoke detector that goes on the plane that tells the pilot and the flight attendants if you're smoking. So that smoke detector has lots of components, right? It has a metal housing, it has a circuit card assembly that has to get what's called conformal coded, there's wire harnesses, there's all this stuff that makes the magic of what is a smoke detector. Or an actuator on a helicopter system, or anything that makes a plane go, right? So there's little flaps on the plane. Those flaps have an anti-icing system, right? All of that kind of stuff. So I've purchased or sold over the years pretty much tip to tail an entire air vehicle. And why economics is important is a number of reasons, particularly in the job I have now. The supplier says, right, I need to know that I'm going to buy 200 pieces. Well, I only have firm demand for 100. I have to do the analysis to say how much risk is the company willing to take on. And as a director, what my job is to mitigate risk. So I don't actually buy anything anymore. I do occasionally when people are falling down on their jobs. But mostly, I look at what's the risk. I have to figure out what the risks are. Then I have to assess them. Then I have to give a dollar value to them. Like, if this isn't sounding like class, I don't know what does, right? But that's not actually a job that we ever talk about. So that's kind of what I do. It's super fun, and it's still in a STEM field. So if you're not a STEM inclined person, like I'm not going to be an engineer, but you want to kind of be in that field and be on the cutting edge, it's a job that's still in that field without actually having to do the CAD work.
Excellent. Thank you. Elena, tell us about your job.
Yeah, sure. I'm an investor at a fund called Greycroft Partners. We're a venture capital firm, so that means that we don't touch the stock market. We actually invest in private companies, so a lot of startups that you might have heard of. Our fund invested early in a company called Venmo, which you might all have on your phone, among other things, including a bunch of cool fashion brands. We're investors in a company called Goop, which is Gwyneth Paltrow's wellness brand, right? So we do a lot of fun investing in businesses that both sell to consumers and sell to other businesses as well. But the thing that they all share is that they're really early stage. And so in the stock market, you kind of know what a company is worth because it has a price on it, right? There's a stock price. But in my job, I'm coming up with the price that we're willing to pay. And so that's a really interesting dynamic. So we do all kinds of different analysis in my job. It's really balanced, though, between both the quantitative side and more of the soft skills, the qualitative side. So a lot of it is relationship management. A lot of it is really using a lot of the themes that you learn about in economics. Supply and demand is a famous one, but also thinking through macroeconomic trends and shifts in consumer behavior. And we talk a lot about things like price elasticity, right? And so I think it's really important, as important as it is to come away knowing all the formulas and really understanding where the lines intersect, like the high level concepts that you learn in economics are applicable across fields, and those are really what's going to stay with you. And so that would be my one takeaway from now being in a job where I write a lot of memos with a lot of charts. Is one of the most annoying parts of economics for me when I was an undergrad was that you couldn't just draw the chart like you remembered it from the textbook, but you then had to do the written portion where you would explain what it meant and why. And that is my job entirely now, but usually around 20 pages long, and it's reviewed by really sophisticated investors. So I would say put some time into that because you might find yourself doing that daily.
Excellent. Now, could you tell us, how did you decide to major in economics, and then how did you make that leap from undergrad to your first position?
Sure. So it was a little roundabout. So I was pretty confident I wanted to do economics when I came to USC. I'm a USC grad. And my dad was an econ major, and that really inspired me. But he had actually studied, he went to Claremont McKenna, but he studied economics and psychology. And so when I came to USC, I learned about behavioral economics, which I thought was a really cool concept that kind of combined what I was interested in. If that's something that's interesting to you, I would take the course, The Science of Happiness, or The Economics of Happiness, from Richard Easterlin. That was a great class. Did you take that? So good. I think one of his proteges now teaches it, but I'm sure it's still great. And then really the way that I ended up in my first job, which was management consulting at Bain & Company. Economics was a really important differentiator for me, actually. I did a bunch of informational interviews with different folks in different areas of the tech space. I thought I wanted to be in an innovative role somewhere. Wasn't sure what that would look like. I connected with a USC alum named Dylan Pierce, who is actually the partner at Greycroft that I work at now. And when I was a sophomore, he told me, go do banking, consulting, or some other kind of analyst program where you're really going to learn the rigorous analytical skills, like pay all of your dues and really concentrate them. And so I took his advice, and I applied to Bain & Company and amongst other firms. And I found out later that one of the biggest differentiators for me as a candidate coming in was that I was an econ major, not a business major. And something that they told me a lot on the job was econ teaches you how to think. Like the business program here teaches you how to do and amazing practical skills. I totally recommend taking some classes out of there. But econ really teaches you how to think critically and how to create and defend your own ideas, which I think is super important.
Great. And I think one of the things that's so interesting about the group that we have here today is, for example, now you already had the idea of economics starting. Now, B, you had a very different experience, if you could share that.
Very different. So I was actually accepted into the film school as a freshman and then they quickly told me that they were phasing out my particular major because they were starting the digital arts program, and I really wanted to just do cinematography and photography. And so I kind of vacillated. They put me in production. It was not where I wanted to be. And I had a general ed economics class taught by, at the time, Dean Shapiro, who's the Dean of Letters, Arts, and Sciences, now Dornsife. And I sat with him in his office hours and said, I'm really struggling with what I want to do. I don't know if I should transfer, but I loved SC, so I really wanted to stay here. And he said, oh, you should be an economics major. And I said, you're just putting forth, your particular bias. And he said, no. He said, and similarly, he said, you already have the creative passion. I knew I always wanted to be in a creative industry. That was a given. He said, I went to art school, arts high school, Cal Arts in the summers between years. So I knew my worth there in the creative side, but I didn't know business, right, in the traditional sense. And he said, don't go into business, because I was thinking about that. He said, you won't learn how to think. You won't learn how to analyze. He said, economics will give you a perspective that will apply in any job market, any role in the company. You can apply your economics degree. And I was, quizzing him on it, and he gave me proof. And, as I graduated, I had the internships that were all in creative fields. They weren't economically lined, but it was great training for every role I've had in companies, and my roles have shifted. I'm, now similarly, like just a lot of people management, but the analytical ability that you get from economics really helps you defend things, helps you look critically at things, and helps you to shape opinion with fact and data. And I think that really proves your worth in the company when it could just be opinion. You have something, how to get the data to back that up. And that's been really critical. And, working with a bunch of architects, which I've done for 20 years, they have design thinking. And it's a kind of like the left-right brain of design thinking. Like I kind of sit between both, but the economic degree really helped me kind of round out my abilities and understand them and understand the business acumen you need to kind of make sure the company's profitable and all those good things. So yes, very circuitous way, but I found it very, very beneficial.
I think this is one of the most significant messages that we have, is to show the many different things that you can do with a degree in economics. And it doesn't have to be just one profession, and it doesn't have to be just one industry. Obviously, you've changed a little bit in terms of consulting and so on, and you're able to work with different industries within your profession. Now, Tiffany, I understand you also did not start out with the idea of majoring in economics.
That's very much true. So I started at USC as a freshman in biochem, which is very, very different than econ, and did that the first year. Did not take any econ classes during that period, and during the summer thought, that's not for me. And so rather than go through 3 more years of that, actually sat down with, back then it was this USC course book that was about this thick. It's probably online now. And I sat with that and flipped through every single major, looking at what would this major do for me? What does the major require? And it kept coming back to econ during that process. And so started talking with more people and ultimately learned what it means to be an econ major. And it's not, like people are saying, it's about a way of thinking. And for someone who was in my position who wasn't really sure what you wanted to do after 4 years of undergrad, just sitting there in between freshman and sophomore year, it for me was a major that would open up a lot of opportunity that would still, I was concerned about, the stigma about not being in a hard science like biochem, but it is still a very respectable major that has helped me throughout my career and that people have saw as a tremendous value. And so as I eventually decided to go to law school later on in my senior year, it's one of those things that continue to help me there. And then in practicing as a litigator, when you think about a typical lawsuit, you really have two phases. You have one, which is liability, right, which you might think of in a criminal case. Is somebody guilty, right? Are you responsible for someone's damages? And part two is damages. And when you think about that, how do you quantify how someone has been harmed, how you've been injured, if someone has breached a contract? That is all econ. And so when I first started working as a lawyer, that was my biggest asset, was that econ background, because there's so many people who are afraid to even skim the surface of it, who are afraid to get into any kind of math. And so they say, hey, Tiffany, I know you don't know anything about patents, but we have a patent case. And of course, there's a damages component of that. And we have an econ expert, and no one wants to talk with them. Because people are just afraid to even get into that, to start talking about damages theories that employ economics. And so that's, I think, where an econ comes into. I didn't even think about this going into it, but it's such a strength in anything that you do, and in the cases that I do, diving into areas that people are afraid of doing, because you have those skills and you have the thought processes, and you're not afraid of going in and using your logical reasoning to solve problems and to help advise clients. And so for me, switching to econ was one of the best decisions I ever made, and I didn't even know it at the time I was flipping through this course book.
Excellent. Now, Elizabeth, you knew early on your interest in majoring in economics, but you also made some changes along the way in your career. Could you tell people about that?
Yeah, certainly. So I think there's one really important theme that I want to kind of point out that you'll see in my own career path, and that's the ability to do qualitative and quantitative together, right? And so the ability to see an equation or see a chart and then write well of what that means has been really important. So I started out, so keep that in mind while I say this a little bit. So I started out doing my dream job. Like, I came into USC, I knew I wanted to do economics, I did it, it was amazing, love it, okay, fine, great. I'm weird, fine. Then I got my dream job, also weird, fine. So I ended up in economic development in a company downtown, thinking I'm gonna change the world, I'm gonna do all this stuff, it's gonna be amazing. And I was like, this is not what I thought it was going to be, and I'm not getting paid, and I have student loans. What am I going to do with my life? And literally had a breakdown. And my mom was like, she worked for Raytheon, and she was like, just move home. I'll help you save for a house, pay me rent still. I still have to pay rent, pay your parents' rent. And then, so I started working in finance. Okay, this seems like a logical thing, right? I'm going to work in finance. I have an economics degree. Hated it. Wanted to die. I was like, this is terrible, and I don't care about these 2 stupid pennies. Seriously, it's rounding. Leave me alone. And my boss told me, your career, I did this thing, whatever, and he's like, your career's over. So I go home crying. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? My career's over. I'm 24 years old or something, right? Okay. So then my mentor, which we'll come back to that point later, I'm sure, from the panel, my mentor says to me, meh, ignore him. There's an opening in contracts. It's lateral. No money, no nothing. You should take it. You're going to love this job. And I'm like, I don't even know what these people do. Who knows what contracts do? Is this a thing? How is this a thing? Actually, contracts is the highest paid auxiliary support service in aerospace. Didn't know it at the time. Good to know. So then I go into contracts. Love it, right? Love everything about it. But why I was good at it is because I had the ability to read, to write, to speak, and to analyze. And that you get from economics. Right? Because you have the qualitative and the quantitative. When you're negotiating a $3 billion contract, no one cares about those 2 pennies anymore, by the way. No one cares. They're like, meh, it's rounding, whatever. Exactly, thank you. No one cares about those stupid 2 pennies. So I did that. Loved it, still love it. It's a huge part of what I do now. The damages thing, Tiffany, I'm sure, can attest. My company is the one suing another company saying, because I put in the terms and conditions, that you owe me consequential incidental damages, now you owe me $100 million, right? That is part of what matters. But if you don't put it in the terms and conditions, you have no rights to sue, right? Or you have no rights to go to the supplier and say, hey, you didn't deliver on your promise. I'm going to go give it to another supplier. Now you got to pay me to pay them to go do the thing, right? So I got into contracts, loved it, still love it. But in the end, I started getting into like the sustainable world with like fair trade and ethical purchasing and all of this. And you guys probably notice I'm wearing Rothy's. And ended up going into supply chain because I feel like in the long term, that's going to be the thing that changes the world. So let me set myself up for the future. And actually, it's not a big jump to go from contracts to supply chain. A lot of it's the same. But the important thing I think that we've kind of talked about on the panel is that it's okay to fail. Like I failed 3 times. My career was over, remember? My career is not over. I'm fine. Right? But that's what they're going to tell you. And be like, oh, well, your career is over. No, it's not. You're going to be fine. Change. It's okay. You don't have to be perfect. By the way, I had less than a 3.0. I couldn't get into Bain. Right? They wouldn't take me because my GPA wasn't high enough. But guess what? I used my education and got the right skills. Mostly because I wasn't good at the biochem part. Right? And USC's hard. Right? Like you have to take all these GE classes and, I got C's. Whatever. But I got A's in Econ.
I mean, just to build on the fail point, which will come up again and again. Speaking of failing, I mean, I almost failed Dr. Narog's class when I was at USC. But, like, it was... but, like, I think it was such an important learning for me. Like, that class was so pivotal for me. For anyone who isn't there yet, it's econometrics.
Oh, yes.
Prepare yourselves. when you're not graded. But like for me, I was so nervous and like scared going into that class. The class was also like probably 90% male. And it's one of those subjects where you can't learn it by reading. You have to learn it by doing the proofs. And I was honestly too embarrassed to ask for help for, I think, like the first half of the semester. I didn't have a study group that I was really comfortable with. Like, I just wasn't a part of, like, the class community. And I think halfway through the semester, I went to Professor Narok, and I was like, you may have noticed I could use some help. And I think she was probably the first one, like, ever in my econ career at USC, and I was, like, a junior, almost senior at this point, who told me, like, it's okay. She's like, you're not going to fail, but even if you did, it would be fine. No one had ever said that. And I think, like, for me, like, the 2 key learnings, just, got to say my two cents here. One was, don't feel awkward reaching out to people in class and, like, really establish those study groups early and often. And don't, like, talk to the people in this room and see who's taking what classes next semester. And really, like, I wish I had dipped into the community more when I was an econ major, because that's how you learn and grow. We talk a lot about like creating your analyses and like explaining them, and you learn so much faster when you're doing it with other people because you're sharing the how and the why. And then I think too, also spend time with the professors and don't be afraid to ask for help and do it as early as possible. Being in a field now, which is primarily male also, we find that our female entrepreneurs who we back are much less likely to ask us for favors and for help. And I think it's the same at the student level too. And like, don't worry about looking dumb. Like, you're smart enough to be here and be in this room. Like, there's no question about your ability. So now it's just about really like getting what you need to succeed. And so I think like all of us would not be here if not for like mentors and for the community. And that's why we're so passionate about being here and giving back and really getting to know each other too for life.
Let me just say so when I was in graduate school, my first semester, I went back in my 30s, like way late, for an MS in sustainability management from Columbia, which was amazing. I lived in New York. So my first class, I go in and there's this other girl in the class. She's like, we have every class together. I was like, we do? Really? I'm like, you never talk. And she's like, no, I don't, but you talk a lot. And I was like, oh, I do. That's true. And she goes, we're in every class. And I was like, really? So she became my best friend. She's still one of my best friends in the whole world. After that, we planned to take every class together. And the difference between undergrad and graduate school for me was significant for a couple of reasons. One, I found a buddy. And we took every class together. Sometimes she didn't like the class. Sometimes I didn't like the class. But we committed to take every class together. And that keeps you accountable. It helps you study. You have questions, whatever. Right? And I used my professors. So in undergrad, I was like, I don't know who are these professors. I didn't go to one office hour in the entire time in undergrad. Maybe one, like writing 101, and that was it. I had a study group, but I never saw a professor. Biggest mistake. In graduate school, I knew all my professors. Like, I still know them by name. And I'm like, hey, what's up, Dr. Bose? What's going on? Like 5 years later. So if you can do those two things and find that buddy, reach out, like you're paying how much money to go here? Take advantage of every single thing that you can. These professors are like world renowned. Get to know them. Let them be your friends. Because honestly, they adore you. So why not?
I can't stress that enough, actually, because obviously Dean Shapiro shaped my career, and actually we're trying to get Northwestern as a client. So I, reached out to him, and I'm like, remember me? And he did, and he had an impeccable memory and knew all of our. It was like Taper Hall 101, our class, and that it was filled, and he knew everyone's name. It was very impressive. But also, I've used a couple of my other professors just as sounding boards as I've made career choices and vacillated between opportunities, and just they're so impartial and so just for you, and they're your advocate, and very unbiased opinion of what seems right based on what you're telling them. And I think what's impressive is that you're all here too. Like, I did not do these things as an undergrad. I was just having a good time and enjoying my life, but not thinking about the long-term goals. So the fact that you're here is already really impressive to me. But really, the network among, I think, your peers is a lot easier sometimes. And, establishing those professorial relationships is harder because it can be intimidating. Some of them are not necessarily the most actively social people in front of the classroom. So you're like, are they going to be like that in office hours? Usually they do open up tremendously, though, in that setting. So you can get to know them as people, and you can ask them anything, and you shouldn't be afraid to. I mean, that's something I was lucky to learn with just a couple of the ones that I had early that gave me that sense of security, but it really does help along the way, too.
So I think mentoring is a great theme that's coming out of this. One thing we wanted to share with everyone tonight is that we are starting a mentoring program. This was based on the last event that we held like this. The first one we did was in February of this year. What we'll be doing is, if people would like to sign up, the idea, we're sort of calling it Salon Series. That's a sort of working title. The idea is we'll put together groups of perhaps 2 alums or professionals with something like 5 or 6 students, and we can, arrange a dinner or a coffee or lunch, something like that. And the idea is to give people an opportunity in a maybe more informal kind of setting, to encourage people. Sometimes also, I would think, I don't even know what to ask or where to start, but then somebody else is talking about something and that makes me think. And so, part of that can be building community, and it can relate to mentoring as well. Now, Tiffany, you had a similar kind of setup with mentoring circles that you used in your legal profession.
Right. So we use mentoring circles, and it's a great way to, one is to get to meet people who are doing something other than what you're doing, right? And to remind yourself and to see that you're not alone in all of this, right? And so we use mentoring circles to pair people in different practice groups, to pair people in different levels of seniority, which is something that we'd like to do here. And it's really an opportunity to use as a sounding board for anything. These are all women, and the types of issues that women may encounter in school or in the workplace might be different than what your male colleagues might have. And so many of us had those experiences where you think, well, okay, that might be because I'm a woman. Let me talk with other people and get advice on how to deal with these issues. They will come up. It's unfortunate. But it's one of those things that I've used very much so in order to find, in my case, like my authentic voice, right? And how I can be portraying myself in the courtroom. And it's not going to be copying some man who's really booming and old, and that's just not my personality, and it's not going to come off as authentic to the judge or to the jury. And so being comfortable in my own skin and being comfortable in my voice to convey that level of authenticity to people, and that's something that I've learned through these types of mentoring circles by learning from other women and what works for them to find out what works for you. And it may not be the same thing, but it's great to have that resource. And so my hope, and Deborah's and all of ours, is that you can use these mentoring circles to meet other women, your peers, to also meet people who are out in the workforce, and to use this as a sounding board for anything that may be on your mind, whether it's work related, whether it's school related, whatever it might be. We're here to help you.
Great. So I think we've all heard about the importance of mentors or role models, and I know, Elena, you also mentioned that was one of your inspirations, I think, with going to Greycroft. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that really attracted me to my job was that one of, so at a VC fund, there's a couple different like levels that people could be at, right? There's like analysts and then associates, principals, you're moving on up, and then there's partners, and then there's general partners. And general partners are like the founders of the fund. They run everything. And one of the general partners of Greycroft is a woman. And it's really rare in my industry for a woman to have founded a fund, to even be at partner level. She founded the fund 13 years ago, and so that was really rare. And we manage 1.5 billion in assets, and that is like really incredible. For me, it was really attractive to go to a fund where there was that female presence. And I think if you were to go to our website and look at our team page, it looks a lot different than the teams of other funds without that influence. We have a really diverse, rich group of people that I love working with. And so it was important for me to have that representation so that I could see. But at the same time, like, she's still my boss, right? And you can't go to your boss about everything the same way that you wouldn't necessarily go to the professor with every question that you might have. And so it's been really valuable for me having a network of other women in other fields I can really draw upon. So I think there's like the peer groups, there's also your mentors, and they could be your current boss or a boss from a previous job, or even just a woman that you find to be really inspiring, whether or not they're like an Econ alum or not. But that's a great resource for you to tap into, and I'd really recommend it.
So the alumni network, regardless of major, is so huge with USC. And I'd underscore enough how I think that is one of the most valuable things that USC brings to all its students and, alums. Every single job that I have had has been at some way, at some point, and some level through the USC family. Early on, I had my mentors who got me into certain industries. The person who poached me into architecture when I was in a design firm said, "Oh, I know so-and-so who's a Trojan and who knows you." And I said, "Yep," and got me there. And then my mentor has placed me at 2 different positions. She's basically taken me with her. So it's interesting. And as we advance in our careers, I find myself doing the same thing. I have a mentee in the architecture school, and I'm already trying to get her an internship at my company. It's just that it's that familial trust that we know how hard we worked, they know how hard we've worked, they know the rigor and experience that you bring, and it's so great. I mean, and it can't be underscored. So even within the department, but broadening that circle and making sure that you connect on other levels is really important as well.
One thing I'll also add too is we've talked a lot about women mentors, but that may not be an option everywhere. And it's like, search for a mentor or a sponsor, and it doesn't have to be limited to women. Like in my industry in law, you might see a lot of women who are at the more junior levels, and then as you progress, that ratio changes a lot for a variety of different reasons. But it's okay. Like, search for somebody who is interested in you, express an interest in what people do. Because the people who can make an interest in your career can look like you or they cannot look like you. But in my case, I did also need to very much draw on male mentors to help me get through each next level. And so I would say definitely reach out to people, whoever you can.
And don't be afraid of the no. So like when I worked at this company called GCAN. By the way, the bird gun, real thing. So we had a bird gun there for windshields for air vehicles. We had a vice president. And he came by my desk one day, just walking around saying hi, whatever. And I asked him to be my mentor. Like, we were talking, right? He could have said no. Okay. But, like, what do I lose if I ask him and he says no? Nothing. What do I gain if I ask him and he says yes? Everything. Right? So it's intimidating to be like, you're 3 levels above me and the vice president of a multinational, because GCAN's a huge company, right? They're actually the first screw manufacturer in the UK ever in life, from like the 1800s. So they we had King's Knight, we had Luton, we had us. So there was like 4 or 5 branches divisions that he was over. So he's like the big cheese, right? Who happened to sit in my office. So why not? Ask him, right? And we ended up being really good friends. We're still friends on Facebook. He ended up going to private equity. Sorry. So much of my career was shaped by him, right? How I interact with other mentors now. And he was an amazing advocate for me. He gave me the best deals to work on. Like I got to work on this JSF deal that was huge. So I got the best things to work on because he knew me and he knew I could handle it. But I would have never gotten that exposure if I hadn't been like, hey, so you want to be my mentor? He was like, okay, great. So don't be afraid of the no. What can they say? Nothing. And all you've lost if they say no is for them to know that you're ambitious.
That's great advice. And one thing that this has come up a number of times in terms of finding mentors. One piece of advice that we've heard is that sometimes you'll reach out to somebody and maybe you don't get a response. And sometimes it can be that, for example, women and minorities get a lot of requests for mentoring when they're in fields where they're underrepresented. So sometimes one thing that can be helpful is if you're reaching out to somebody to say, hey, can we talk or something, to be as specific as you can about what you're looking for from the relationship. For example, if I get an email and somebody, I think they want help finding a job, I might not be able to help them at all. But maybe they just want to, meet for coffee, hear a little bit more about it. That sometimes when they're much more sort of manageable, bite-sized kind of commitments, at least to start with, then you might get a better response rate, especially when you don't know the person and they really don't know what to expect. So from the mentee perspective, make sure, you sort of put out there. It's obviously different in every case, and when you're in the same organization, you have a common ground already. But that also leads us to another theme that we wanted to talk about tonight, which is leadership. And we believe that not only does economics serve as a fantastic foundation for all kinds of careers, but that it also positions you very well for a leadership position. And leadership can mean all different kinds of things. It can mean just excelling really well in whatever it is that you do. It can mean leadership in terms of an organizational position. So I wanted to ask the panelists their thoughts on how do they feel that their economics education helped them in terms of advancing into a leadership role, whatever that might be in your case.
So for me in architecture, one of the ways most of my companies have grown strategically is through acquisition. And one way I've been able to insert myself, and actually literally insert myself to conversations when we hear the rumblings like, oh, we're looking at this area or we're looking at this market. One thing I always did was hurry back and start researching. And I think economics prepared me for that. Like I wouldn't have known that if I was just doing my design work, but I could see the trends, I could kind of do forecasting and figure out, well, is this viable? Is this not, is this the right market for our 5 markets and expansion? And I did that very early on at one of my first companies, which was a fairly large national firm. And I actually wrote to the CEO and I just said, I have an economics degree. You may not know this. I'm in LA, he's in Detroit. And I just approached him and said, here's some firms that I noticed that, align with what we're doing in areas that we are looking at. And, he called me and he said, wow, I can't believe you did this. And he was so impressed. He actually flew to LA and met with me and talked to me about what I wanted to do. And I said, I'm new to the industry. This was my first architecture job outside of my first design job. And so it was a really great doorway. Like I would never have been able to even do that analysis or kind of think that big if it wasn't for my economics degree. And now I'm, a shareholder, so I have to do these things. But, I'm always trying to encourage people, have that voice and try to do those things that you're not told to do, but you can do, and present that. Even if it's, hey, I'm working on this as a side project, present it to, your potential, employers of your internships and then your jobs. I think that really carries through.
So that experience and that thinking was able to apply to some bigger picture things that opened up more opportunities
For leadership.
you. Excellent. Do others have any thoughts in terms of leadership? How did your economics degree open up doors as you navigated through your careers?
So first, I have to be perfectly honest and say I took Dr. Bennis's leadership class, which was amazing. Sorry, they don't offer that anymore. If they offer a similar to, you should totally take it. It was unbelievable. I think the biggest thing for me, especially managing people, and what differentiates the people that work for me and what differentiated me is the ability to take the next step. So I get a lot of people who come into my office who are like, oh, well, we have this thing and I can't figure it out. Well, like, okay, well, what else did you do? I don't know. I did the one thing you told me to do. Okay. And then what did you do? Nothing. Okay, well, now you're on my chopping block. I've got my eye on you and I might have to let you go. Right? And that's the harsh reality of life. So what economics gives you is like, okay, you've got supply, demand, elasticity. There's all of these factors, right? So if you can think, what's the next step? Like, what else can I do to solve this problem? How else can I present the data, slice and dice the data, do whatever I got to do to figure out what is the root cause of whatever issue's going on, right? When you get down to the root cause, well, how do you know? Well, because I did the 15-level dissection of the data, and I came out with the answer. And by the way, that was 100,000 lines, and I wrote some SQL code. Cool, right? So for me, and Alice was laughing at me when I was telling her this on the phone one day. So I started here in 1995. There was no such thing as the internet. I mean, there was, but barely. And we had to take Quick Basic, which is like a very simple programming code. But the fact that economics made me take coding in 1995 is really mind-blowing, honestly. Because first of all, who's doing that? And second of all, the ability to understand what the SQL code is saying, even if I'm not writing it, has made so much difference. Because I can look at what my employees are doing and go, I don't think this is right. Right? So having that understanding, taking advantage of all those opportunities, and then learning how to think, what's the next step? Ask yourself the 5 whys, and when you get there, maybe you'll have the answer.
I think maybe I can speak to how you can stand out at the junior levels or like seem like a leader among your peers using Econ. It's something you touched on briefly, which is this idea of like the core drivers of a problem. A lot of people look to solve what's happening, but I think Econ teaches you like, hold on, you can't just like change this one variable and then everything shifts, right? I think the most useful exercise from doing Econ classes is remember when you'd have to write like what is happening and then up or down or left or right, which direction it's pushing the line in. That, like I write that on my decks when I print them out. So I'm on boards of directors now for some of our companies, and I literally print out the board decks and I move it and I see, like I'm thinking, wow, what is going to be the impact of this scenario or that scenario? And I think that is really powerful because then you come with the answers, right? And maybe they're not the right answers, but you have some direction and you have confidence in like, oh, this is why this is happening. And I guarantee you that 99% of your peers in whatever field you choose to go into, or maybe it's the 8th field you choose to go into once you've pivoted a few times, right? Like none of them are thinking down to that level. So like being able to start here with the facts and then drill down into what the drivers are and then be able to come back up and be like, I wonder what would change those. Like you're already light years ahead. And like, I didn't realize that before I came into the workforce, that is a differentiated skill set. Like don't underestimate the value.
Just to like, oh, sorry, Tiffany, just to like really quickly tag on to that. I think what's interesting about that is that inherently gives you a confidence, right? You've done that research and you can then present that, and that gives you leadership skills, right? So that is something that no matter, if it's your first day on a job and you present that, I mean, it's giving you that building block to think and know that you're right, and own it. And I think that's really important too to that leadership.
That's
part.
almost exactly what I was going to say is that, I remember when you're a baby lawyer, you know nothing. You really know nothing. It's the big secret in it all. And I remember being, getting into about my 3rd year. I've been practicing for 8 years. Getting into my 3rd year of practice, and I was on the phone with a client explaining something, and I hung up the phone, And I thought to myself, wow, that actually made sense. The legal advice that I was giving. And part of that is just having those logical reasoning skills, which are skills that you develop in Econ, right? A to B to C. Understanding that, how to explain it to somebody, which may be different than how you would explain it to an economics expert or a damages expert or somebody else or a finance expert. Being able to explain that and having the confidence in your explanation because you understand everything. And so once those come into play, it makes it just easier to become a leader because you have that confidence, and other people can tell, and other people start to look to you to lead and take more responsibility on projects, and because you're there and you have that experience and you have that knowledge, and you also have the ability to communicate that to others. So those are all core skills that I think you develop in Econ.
Excellent. That's great advice. So we have an opportunity to do some Q&A now. What we'll do is then break. Everyone can grab a plate and then rejoin a table. And we have some signage that sort of labels the different fields, professions/industries that you might be interested in. But do we have any questions that you'd like to ask the panel to start with? Yes, Carla.
Hi, my name is Clara. I just was wondering where in your early career you kind of sought out a mentor. So was that in like a firm that you eventually wanted to join, or was that a professor you connected with at USC, just kind of like at our point as seniors?
So I didn't even know that one of my professors would be a mentor. I just sought advice from her. I mean, it was actually a business communications professor that we just connected, so I felt really safe asking her. And looking back, I know she's a mentor, but I certainly didn't know at the time. But professionally, it was one of my clients actually from my first job who was an architect, and I was frustrated in my first career, which seemed perfect for me. It was kind of your story, that I really loved being in more of the design side, graphic design, and it was just not gelling, right? And so one of my clients, how did you get where you are? It seems really interesting. I love like the work we're doing for you. And he told me, he said, well, you should join an architecture firm. But he kind of did that through sharing his life and his path. And so that was the first time I kind of identified, I can go to this person as a sounding board. And then I realized, I didn't, it's like dating. It's like I didn't ask him, like, would you be my mentor? But I kind of established that relationship. And, I look back and we're still friends. And, I see his grandkids and everything. It's a really great relationship. But I still will ask him, things to this day.
For me, so a mentor can come from anywhere, and that's one of the things that, it can be just this organic thing. There's some instances where you may get a formal mentor, which is what a lot of professions do as well. Like my job will assign you to a formal mentor to help guide you through the process. But also, a lot of these relationships develop organically. So one instance is when I was touring housing in New York, looking for where I was going to live for law school, and I ran into the person who was currently the tenant, was a former USC grad, and just started talking with me and telling me all about living in New York, about going to law school. And that person, we didn't overlap at all in law school years. He was getting ready to move out. He was just showing his place, and he became my mentor in ways I couldn't even imagine, because in the advice in choosing a law school to go to and choosing a profession and choosing a place to work, all of that is just because somebody expressed an interest, and it's a two-way street. So you don't expect this random person you just met to reach out to you, but it's taking that opportunity to say, hey, would you mind if I emailed you every now and then? I know you're no longer going to be in law school, but I'm going to have some questions. And there are people out there who are totally going to be willing to do that. And just as some of the other panelists have said, so what if they say no? I don't know this person. It doesn't matter. But it's one of those things where just taking that step and developing a relationship and recognizing that a mentor can come from anywhere.
I would say my first mentor, I just wanted to get some exercise at lunch. I was like, hey, don't you walk every day at lunch? And she was like, yes, I do. And I was like, cool, can I walk with you? And she said, yes. I said, great. And then I realized, oh my God, she's amazing. Like, we're still friends. and she's significantly older than I am. I think I was 23 and she was like 51 maybe. Still one of my closest friends. So it doesn't have to be like some, what the other panelists have said, some big thing. Sometimes it's just like, oh, you walk at lunch. Let's go walk. And then you end up spilling your guts because you're like, I can't believe he told me my career was over. And she's like, yeah, whatever. Right? While we were walking at lunch in our visors and our dresses with sneakers, right? Like, I was that girl. Fine, whatever. So it doesn't have to be, find a person you like a human that you like and that you respect and that has some advice for you, and then see where it goes.
Yeah, I think that finding a mentor, like everyone gives that as the advice, and it can be super intimidating because it's like, it makes it sound like they're signing up for a job with a job description, and then like also you're responsible for like managing a person. Like in reality, I think it's much better when it happens organically, but there are things that you can do to push the probability in your favor of getting a mentor, right? And so that means when you go in the room, like let's say it's your first day of training at your new job, you should be the first person to raise your hand and ask an intelligent question. Like, no reason not to do that. If, in a class, if there's something that you are actually really interested in and you wanted to learn more about, it's like, stay after. Or if you see events like these, like coming here puts you at a much higher probability of getting a mentor, right? Because the odds that you either walk away getting one of our contact information, or you say, I'm interested in something totally different, we probably have a friend that we could introduce you to, right? And so I think starting small, like my biggest piece of advice to people is send an email with like a really specific ask. Like the perfect mentor request email has 3 components. One is 1 sentence with context on who you are and how you found me. 2 is an ask for a 15-minute informational call, and like say why, like give why I should talk to you, or why it would be a great connection. Be like, I saw that you did XYZ at USC. I do that too, and I'd love to get your advice on some things. And then 3 is suggest a couple of times or days that would work for you. Make it really easy for them. In the first message or the first ask, never ask for something that requires someone else. Like never ask them to go do something on your behalf, because the odds that they get it done are low. Ask for them to make the initial connection. And then if you guys really hit it off and there's chemistry, like they'll want to keep chatting, right? And you end that 15-minute phone call and you say, would you mind if I email you if I have any follow-up questions? Done. And like start really slow. You want to play a little hard to get with this mentor. And then eventually you guys will develop that relationship over time. I think like that's a really good way to go about it. If, I know that not everyone has the privilege of having access to people in their networks that like could really define their careers. And so that's a great way to make it happen for yourself.
I hope you took notes. This is the best advice ever. I have 2 phones. I have 2 calendars, yeah. And I don't accept meetings without agendas. It just is what it is. Like I have too many people coming in my office. Like I have meetings with people come in my office during my meeting time. I have to go. Like I need to use the ladies' room. Like, come on, people. Can you just, no. So when you do this, you're going to get a response at a much higher probability than like, will you be my mentor?
This is excellent advice. And another thing, too, because as we've talked about, the word, mentor can sort of be a loaded word because we don't know maybe what it means. Sometimes it's very helpful just to think in terms of role models. It could be somebody that you don't even know that well, but you see that they, there's something about that you admire the way that they work, and even from sort of, not having a mentoring relationship, but just from observing and asking yourself, why was this person effective in what they did? What was it that they brought? And that can be, men, women, anybody. But, identifying some people and saying, I really like the way that, like you talked about Morty Shapiro. He was also a professor back then. I just really admired the way that he interacted with people, the way that he sort of led. And so then when I started teaching, that was a really good example. I could think of, why do people respond so well to that person? So, mentoring can mean a lot of different things. Thank you. Any other questions for the panelists? Great. So we have dinner for everybody. Please take a plate and
Set up 4 tables and just did it roughly. At the far table are the 2 that have to do with data. I have you and Elizabeth. Hopefully, we'll work at that table. And anybody who's interested in data management and what they were doing, please sit over there.
Excellent. So this is a public sector example as well.
In consulting, we have Ritika, who has done consulting, who can tell you more about it. Wealth management, we have both Alaina, boy, am I having a hard time, sorry. Alaina and Armane, who are both in some aspect of that. And then at the far table, legal. And Deborah put you over here. So feel free, move around. And you're not restricted to any one place, but now we would love to have you get to know various positions.
Excellent. Thank you. And please join me in thanking our panelists for a wonderful conversation today. Thank you so much.